and welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host Demo, and it's time for another deck tech. This is Hans Eriksson, the Bearded Wonder. We're making a Hans deck. I was sort of on the fence about whether I was going to do this or not. It was, I don't like to do a deck tech for a deck that it's too obvious what's going on. It seems like my time is better used making a deck tech for a deck that it's not so obvious what's going on, right? With Hans Eriksson, at first I thought it was obvious what was going on there, but then I thought, maybe it's not so obvious. I think that when people read this ability, the first thing they think is, I'm going to cheat huge creatures into play. And I just don't know if that's the right strategy to go. I tried a few builds with this already. And the strategy of I'm going to cheat a Terastodon into play is, I just don't know if it's worth it because you're going to kill your hands, right? And so, like, how many times are you going to do this, right? How many times are you going to, I cheat a big creature into play, my hands dies, then I have to recast him, do it again, and he has to attack, so you have to cast him, then wait another turn, and then attack, then get the trigger, and maybe you have a big creature on top of your library, maybe you don't, right? And then you're like, okay, well, I'll just put Darksteel Plate in the deck, right? And then he doesn't die. And then, and I thought, and I went down the road of, I'm going to put a bunch of regeneration effects in there, right? Like Broken Fall and stuff like that. And I just thought that clogged up the deck too much. Then, okay, now I'm doing too many things. I'm putting regenerate effects in there or indestructible effects in there. I got to put the big creatures in there. I also want some small creatures in there, and then also I really want to give Hans haste so he can attack right away. And I just found myself getting clogged up with, and also I want to be looking at the top of my library or stacking the top of my library, right? So it was just too many effects. And I found myself getting too many of the one kind of effect in my hand at a time, and it really didn't work. So I got rid of the idea of big creatures. Big creatures, you're gone. See you later. The only big creature, I'll just say right now, the only big creature that I have two big creatures in the deck. One is Vigor because he just works spectacularly with hands, right? He's not going to kill your hands. He's going to come into play. Your hands is going to take 6 damage and get 6 counters on it. So that's only a good thing. And then each, creature that comes afterward is going to have the same thing. So that's an auto include in the deck. I also have Balefire Dragon. Balefire Dragon is the only card that's actually going to kill hands in this deck because I think it's worth it. It's a board wipe, right? Being able to cheat a board wipe into play, right? I think is worth it. Being able to go, okay, well, my opponent has a huge board. They just cast a Avenger of Zendikar. It's worth it for me for my hands to die just so I can just demolish their entire board. It just seems worth it to me. So that's the only creature I put in the deck that's actually going to kill hands when it comes into play, right out of the gate. There are other scenarios, obviously, where it is possible that he dies. But essentially, I went the route of, what creatures are there that I can cheat into play that aren't going to kill hands and hands isn't going to kill them? So I want creatures that have a power of 3 or less and a toughness of 2 or greater. As I do, if you've watched my deck building, real-time deck building video, right? I just go on Gather and I just put in those descriptors, right? And I start from the top with converted mana cost, right? I'm going to look for because obviously I can just cheat tiny little creatures into play, but what good is that? I want creatures that normally would cost a lot of mana, but that don't have a high toughness power, or a good toughness, the proper toughness power ratio, we'll say. So starting out, Meteor Golem, perfect in this deck, right? It's a 7-drop, right? But we're going to be cheating it into play. It's a 3/3, so it's not going to kill hands. Hands isn't going to kill it. We get to destroy a permanent. Perfect, right? Bane of Progress, one of my favorite cards in the entire format. It comes into play as a 2/2, so you have to stack the triggers appropriately, right? You stack the trigger, the Bane of Progress trigger first, and then the hands trigger, right? So the hands one, the fight trigger will resolve first, and hands stays alive, Bane of Progress stays alive, and then everything gets destroyed. So that perfect in this deck. Duplicant, perfect in this deck. And also stack those triggers properly, right? You have to have the fight ability happen first, and then you exile the creature, right? Because if the creature is big, then your duplicant's going to get big and it's going to kill hands, right? So make sure you stack the triggers. I really like Sweet Gum Recluse in this deck. This is such an interesting card. When I first saw it, it seems underwhelming at first. The important part of note here is Sweet Gum Recluse enters the battlefield, put 3+1/+1 counters on each of any number of target creatures that entered the battlefield this turn. I just really like that ability. So what we can do, so if you only have Sweet Gum Recluse, he puts 3 counters. So if we flip this off the top of our library, we'll put 3 counters on Sweet Gum Recluse, assuming it's the only creature that's come into play. And then it's going to be a 3/6. It isn't going to kill hands. Hands isn't going to kill it. Everybody's happy, right? Ideally, though, we play a creature first, right? So Sweet Gum, we know Sweet Gum Recluse is on the top of our library. We play a creature, right? So we're in our main phase and we play a creature, whatever creature, doesn't matter, right? We play our duplicant, let's say. We play our duplicant, then we attack, and Sweet Gum Recluse comes off the top and puts 3 counters on itself and duplicant, right? Because they have both entered the, right? So we're just getting so much more value, and even if let's say hands we can give him haste, and we do have lots of ways to give him haste in this deck. We can play him and then attack right away and get the trigger, and Sweet Gum Recluse comes into play and puts 3 counters on him and hands. So now hands is a 4/7, sorry, and Sweet Gum Recluse is a 3/6, right? So they're both really big. Neither of them are killing each other, so it works out great for everybody. Next up, Falkenrath Marauders. I just like this card in this deck. Again, it's a 5-drop. That's kind of a lot. Cheating it into play. It's not going to kill hands. Hands isn't going to kill it. It's going to hit our opponents right away. Like, I was looking at a lot of cards. At first, I was looking at ETB cards, but then I was like, yeah, okay, but why do we have to do ETBs? We really don't. I already have a lot of ETB decks, so I didn't want to go that route. I thought the creature that comes into play is going to be attacking, so why not have creatures that have those damage triggers that when they hit an opponent, right? By the way, attack triggers don't work. I've seen a few people doing the attack trigger thing. That doesn't work, right? I mean, they'll get it the next time they attack, but if they come into play attacking, tapped and attacking, you do not get the attack trigger. The attack trigger happens when you declare them as an attacker. So I wouldn't go that route just because you're not guaranteed. I like the fact that I'm getting their trigger right away. Falkenrath Marauders, right away they come into play, they're going to hit my opponent, right? They have flying. Obviously, I'm not going to attack an opponent that I know can block it, right? They're going to come into play, they're going to connect right away, and I got a 4/4 right away, right? And then the next time a 6/6, like they get huge real fast. Blade Griff Prototype from the new set. This is just a neat card. Really cool. The only downside is it's kind of expensive. 5 mana for this is a bit much, but we don't care about that, right? It's perfect in this deck. It has 3 power, so it's not going to kill hands. Hands is not going to kill it because it has 2 toughness. It's perfect. It comes into play. It is immediately going to connect with an opponent, and then, and this card is so perfect for this deck because who are we going to be attacking, right? With hands. Hands, we're going to be attacking probably the weakest player with hands, or at least the guy who doesn't have any blockers, right? Not any big ones. So we're going to be attacking a player who probably has no creatures. So if we're going to be doing that, then Blade Griff Prototype is going to hit that player, and then that player is going to be able to kill another opponent's thing. Their big scary thing can get removed from the table. So Nara, Wolvid Familiar. This is, as a partner commander, super underwhelming, I think. I just think giving your creatures indestructible only on your turn is pretty useless. You want it more. I said this in my Commander Legends review. It would be better if it was not on your turn, because if your opponents are going to board wipe, it's going to be on their turns, right? So protecting my commander on my opponent's turns would be more important to me. However, with attacking, obviously, it's great, right? So Anara is going to come into play. Anara is not going to be indestructible because not a commander, but Hands is going to be indestructible, right? So Anara will come into play, and Hands will be immediately indestructible because it's a static ability, right? And so the fighting doesn't matter, right? He'll survive. And then every time after that, when we attack, right, indestructible commander, so that's great. Naeth, great in this deck. You cheat it into play. Again, doesn't kill hands. Hands doesn't kill it. And immediately we draw a card because you're fighting, right? Hands is going to be fighting a lot. So we immediately draw a card. And also, I suspect our creatures will be getting blocked a lot because we're attacking a lot. So we'll just be drawing lots of cards off of this. I had to try to fit at least a couple of Enrage creatures in here, right? So Needletooth Raptor I have, which is going to come into play, not kill hands, and we immediately deal 5 damage. And we basically, 5 damage is kill one of your opponent's creatures, typically, right? And then we also have Ranging Raptors, which is going to net us a basic land. It's only a one-shot, though. That's the only downside. That's why I didn't want to go too much down this road, because Needletooth Raptor, it kills one of our opponent's creatures, and then the following turn, it's probably just going to sit there. I'll probably use Needletooth Raptor and Ranging Raptors as blockers for the rest of, they'll probably just sit there and do be in blocking duty for the rest of the game. If you have a Needletooth Raptor sitting there, I suspect that your opponents aren't going to want to attack you because you're going to end up doing 5 damage to something. So I also put Hornet's Nest in here. So again, right away, I put Hornet's Nest in play. It's attacking even though it has Defender, which is kind of funny. And it's going to immediately give me a 1/1 Death Touch flying insect. Because we're attacking so much, having blockers is really important. That's why I put it in here. And then, because it's attacking, they might actually block it, which is fine because it's going to take damage and it's going to make us more insect tokens. So that's why I like it in the deck. Generous Patron. Here is another. I always have at least a couple of what I think are super underrated cards. When you look at Generous Patron, I think it confuses people a little by the wording on what it actually does, right? You support 2, which is you put a +1 counter on each of up to 2 other target creatures. Any creatures, including your opponents. This card basically says when it comes into play, draw 2 cards. It can anyway, right? You can play Generous Patron, put 2 counters, 1 on each of your opponent's creatures, put it on their useless ones that you don't care about, that are never going to attack anyway, and then you draw 2 cards. 3 mana, get a body, get a 1/4 creature, and draw 2 cards that's killer value. But also we can put the counters on our creatures if we want, right? So, and then I also have Retta, Heir to Keld. Not super, it just works in this deck because, again, it's a 3/3, so it's not killing hands. Hands isn't killing it. She also allows us to look at the top card of our library, which is super handy. Knowing what's coming down is super handy. I just want to make a point here. You can make a hands deck with no creatures, 0, and it would just be whenever he attacks, draw a card. That's it, right? That's pretty good value. Because if it's not a creature, you just put it in your hand. Maybe we just want to attack with our hands and draw whatever, maybe we have a heroic intervention on top of our deck, and we want that in our hand to save our creatures in case our opponent's board wiped, right? So we attack, draw our heroic intervention. Oh, and then look at that. We have a land on top of our deck now. So now we can play the land with Rata. So just stuff like that, I think, works really good in a deck like this. I have Hu Tao, Honored Physician. He, again, is going to, we likely aren't going to need to cheat him into play. He only costs 3 anyway. We probably don't want him to attack because what's the point? But that being said, there are going to be moments where you're going to be attacking with hands and you don't know what's on top of your deck. And it's just good to know that you have a creature that isn't going to kill hands and hands isn't going to kill it. And then his ability, obviously, goes without saying. We're going to be any of our creatures that die, like our Meteor Golem dies. Hey, let's put that back on top of our deck and then we can reuse it with hands, right? That being said, we also have Noxious Revival, which does the same thing. You can go more down that road if you want of putting things from your graveyard on top of your library. I just have those 2 work good in this deck. And then, obviously we want to be manipulating the top of our deck. Worldly Tutor and Sylvan Tutor goes without saying. This is the one situation where Sylvan Tutor is just as good as Worldly Tutor because we don't want to be doing this on our opponent's turn. We always want to be doing it on our turn right before we attack, right? So we attack, we look at our opponents and we go, that guy's got a really problematic enchantment that I want to get rid of. I'll Sylvan Tutor for a Meteor Golem. Or that opponent has a really problematic army that I want to get rid of. I will Worldly Tutor for a Balefire Dragon, right? So it's just a one shot. I go get a solution out of my deck to solve a problem. And then The not so one shots, Miri's Guile, super underrated card that I try to put in as many decks as I can. You got to think about it a little bit, right? So on your upkeep, you'll look at the top three. The one on top is going to be the one you draw. So you put the land on top or whatever, and then the next card down is the creature that you want to cheat into play, right? So it's going to be 1, 2, and then the third one is whatever, right? And then scroll rack, since it's dividing top, obviously. I mean, looking at the top card of your library is good, but you don't want to go overboard, right? Because again, you're just going to have a handful of them. You're going to have your scroll rack in play or your Sensei's divining top in play, and then you draw the other one and you're like, okay, well, I don't need both, and it just sits in your hand. And then rounding everything out, we're going to be attacking a lot. Rhythm of the Wild, probably a no-brainer in any Gruul deck, but in this deck, it's particularly fantastic. Break Through the Line is one that, doesn't get played nearly enough again. Pay 1 mana, our hands gets haste and is also unblockable, which is not, which is also going to be super important because we don't want our hands to just be attacking into huge creatures and dying every time, or else that sort of defeats the purpose of what we're doing. Lightning Greaves, obviously, haste, Shroud, can't go wrong with that. I do have Dark Steel Plate, because Dark Steel Plate is going to save our hands from the fighting and also save our hands from being blocked by our opponent's creatures. Dolmen Gate is just fantastic in a deck like this. We're going to be attacking a lot. Not having to worry about our creatures dying to combat damage is fantastic. And then Wrap in Vigor. I didn't go the route of put all these regenerate effects in here. I have Wrap in Vigor, which is another super underrated, underplayed card. Usually it's a heroic intervention, typically. I'd say like 99% of the time heroic intervention is used. It's to save your creatures from a board wipe, which Wrap in Vigor is going to do. It's fantastic in this deck. It's going to save our hands, or it's just going to be, save our creatures from a board wipe. I also have Yavimaya Hollow. That's the only other and Yavimaya Hollow, again, is another card I think I've said before that I just put in almost every green deck. It's just so good. I found that I just wasn't getting enough value out of hands. How many times are you going to be attacking with him in a game, right? He costs 4. You might have to wait around if he doesn't have haste to attack. So maybe you're going to be attacking 3-4 times tops. Lithoform Engine and Shrionic Resonator, I put them both in here. Just being able to copy that ability and get 2 things off the top, I think is totally worth it. And again, these are cards. I mean, obviously, the Lithoform Engine is new, but a card like Shrionic Resonator, it's one of those cards that'll just sit and play, and people really don't pay attention to it just because it's not super powerful. So it can just sit there and just get you so much value. And so that's the nuts and bolts of the deck. That's pretty much it. That's my Hans Eriksson deck. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for tuning in.